In the year 1324, a man walked into Cairo and accidentally broke its economy. He wasn't a conqueror, he wasn't there to trade. He was a pilgrim passing through on his way to Mecca, and he was carrying so much gold that the moment he started giving it away, the price of gold in Egypt collapsed and stayed broken for years. His name was Musa, and the empire he ruled in West Africa was so rich that historians today still can't agree on a number. Some have called him the wealthiest human being who has ever lived, richer than any king, any emperor, any billionaire alive right now. But here's the part nobody tells you. He did not inherit that throne the normal way. He became king because the man who ruled before him sailed west into the open Atlantic with a fleet of ships and was never seen again. So how does a deputy end up the richest man on earth? How much gold does it take to crash a country by accident? And if his empire was the wealthiest on the planet, why has almost no one in the West ever heard of it? This is the story of Mansa Musa. And like every case on this channel, it ends with something vanishing. To understand Musa, you have to understand what he was sitting on top of. In the 1300s, the Mali Empire stretched across roughly 1.29 million square kilometers of West Africa. By some measures, the second largest empire on Earth at the time, behind only the Mongols. It covered parts of what is now Mali, Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, Mauritania, Niger, and Burkina Faso, 2,000 miles end to end. And underneath it was gold. The gold fields of Bambouk and Bour were among the most productive on the planet. For centuries, a huge share of the gold flowing into Europe and the Islamic world, the gold in their coins, their crowns, their cathedrals, had come up out of the ground in West Africa and crossed the Sahara by camel. Mali sat on the southern end of that desert like a gate, and whoever controlled the gate controlled the gold. But here's the detail most people miss. Mali's other treasure wasn't gold at all, it was salt. In the Sahel, salt was so scarce and so necessary to stay alive that it traded pound for pound against gold. Caravans came down from the Saharan salt mines at Tagaza, carrying slabs of it like bullion. And Mali sat in the middle of that exchange too, gold going north, salt coming south, and the empire taxing both. The Mansas, the kings, kept it tightly controlled. By law, every gold nugget belonged to the king. Ordinary people could only trade in gold dust. The big pieces went to the crown. So the wealth didn't just flow through Mali, it pooled at the very top around one man. And in roughly 1312, that man became Musa. Now, about how he got there. Musa came from the Keita dynasty, the family of Sundiata, the legendary founder of the empire. But he wasn't first in line. According to the Arab historian al-Umari, and remember that name, because almost everything we know about Musa traces back to him. Musa once explained how he came to power. The king before him, he said, had become obsessed with one question: what lies on the far side of the Atlantic Ocean? So that king outfitted a fleet. Al-Umari records around 200 ships, loaded them with men, gold, and provisions, and sent them west. One ship came back. Its captain described the others sailing into what he called a river in the middle of the sea, most likely the Canary Current, and disappearing over the horizon. The king's response? He built a bigger fleet, 2,000 ships by the account. He boarded one himself, left Musa in charge as his deputy, and sailed west. That was the last anyone ever saw of him. And here's where I have to stop you, because almost every video about this calls that king Abubakari II. Read that name carefully, because it's wrong. No king named Abu Bakr II ever ruled Mali. That name comes from a mistranslation by a 19th century European scholar named Baron de Slane, who misread the historian Ibn Khaldun. In the original text, Abu Bakr isn't a king at all. He's just one of Musa's ancestors. The actual predecessor Ibn Khaldun names is a man called Muhammad ibn Ku. It's a small thing, but it tells you something. The story you've been told about this empire has been passed through 6 centuries of broken translations and exaggerations. So as we go, we're going to keep separating what actually happened from what got added later, because the next part is where the legend really starts. In 1324, Musa decided to make the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca that every Muslim who can is called to make once in their life. But Musa did not travel like a pilgrim. He traveled like a moving city. According to Al-Umari, the caravan that left Mali numbered around 60,000 people. Court officials, soldiers, and singing poets called griots. And we have to say this plainly, because the splendor has a cost underneath it. Roughly 12,000 of those people were enslaved. The gold that made this journey legendary was carried in part on the backs of people who had no choice but to walk it. And there was a lot of gold. Around 100 camel loads of it by the account. Now, are those numbers exact? Almost certainly not. Al-Umari was writing it down years later, from stories told in Cairo. Medieval chroniclers rounded up, the way legends do. But even if you cut the numbers in half, you are still describing the single most expensive journey of the medieval world. The caravan crossed more than 4,000 miles, and in July of 1324, it reached Cairo, at the time one of the richest, most sophisticated cities on earth, the capital of the Mamluk Sultanate. Cairo thought it had seen wealth. It hadn't. Musa camped near the pyramids. He sent the Sultan of Egypt a casual gift of 50,000 gold dinars, just to say hello. And then, for 3 months, he and his entourage did what they did everywhere. They gave gold away. To officials, to the poor, to anyone who crossed their path, because in Islam, charity is a sacred duty. And Musa was performing it on the scale of an empire. There's one detail that captures the man perfectly. When he was invited to meet the Sultan, protocol demanded he kneel and kiss the ground. Musa refused. He would bow to God in Mecca, but he would not prostrate himself before another king. As far as Musa was concerned, he didn't have a superior in that room. And then the gold did something nobody intended. There was suddenly so much of it in Cairo that it stopped being rare. The price of gold in Egypt fell by as much as a quarter, according to some accounts, and it stayed depressed for years afterward. One man's generosity had quietly destabilized the currency of one of the world's great economies. Now, you'll hear it said that he crashed Egypt's economy for 12 years, or that it caused $1.5 billion in losses. Be careful with those. The gold really did lose value. That part is in the sources. But the precise figures, the exact decade, those got added by modern writers and pop finance websites. Real historians who've gone back to the Mamluk records think the damage was real, but smaller and shorter than the legend says. The truth is impressive enough. It doesn't need the inflation. And then comes my favorite part of the whole story, because it's the part that makes him human. Musa gave away so much gold that on the journey home, he ran out. The richest man on earth, the man who broke Cairo's gold market by accident, had to borrow money. He took out loans at high interest from the same Cairo merchants he'd been showering with gold weeks earlier. The wealthiest human being who ever lived, going home broke, paying interest to get there. When Musa finally got home, the empire that greeted him was bigger than the one he'd left. While he was away, his general had captured the great trading cities of Gao and Timbuktu and folded them into Mali, and Musa turned that timing into a legacy. He'd brought people back with him. Most famously, an architect and poet from Muslim Spain named Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, and he poured gold into building. The Jingwereber Mosque, raised in Timbuktu in 1327, still stands today. He built mosques in Gao, and he turned a dusty river town called Timbuktu into something the world had never seen in that part of Africa, a center of learning. At its height, Timbuktu drew scholars from across the Islamic world. Its libraries filled with manuscripts on law, astronomy, medicine, mathematics. There's a saying that survived from that era, that in Timbuktu, a book could be worth more than its weight in gold. Read that again and let it land. In the richest gold empire on earth, the most valuable thing in the city was knowledge. So now we can come back to the question everyone asks: how rich was he actually? And the honest answer is, nobody knows. Not vaguely, genuinely, structurally, nobody can know. You may have seen the number $400 billion. You'll find it on 100 websites. I'll tell you exactly where it came from. In 2012, a celebrity finance website published a list of the richest people in history, and they put Musa at the top with that figure. It was a guess. It went viral, and it's been repeated as fact ever since. The historians who actually study this period won't give you a number, because there isn't an honest one to give. One of them, Rudolf Ware, put it best. He said the accounts of Musa's wealth are so overwhelming that it's almost impossible to even picture how rich and powerful he truly was. Another simply said, Musa was richer than anyone could describe. That's the real answer. Not a number. A man whose wealth broke the tools we use to measure wealth. And there's one piece of evidence that proves how far that wealth echoed. 50 years after Musa died, on the other side of the world, a mapmaker in Spain sat down to draw the known world. It's called the Catalan Atlas, made in 1375. And there, in the empty space where Europeans imagined West Africa to be, the mapmaker drew a single figure, a black king, seated on a throne, crown on his head, holding up a lump of gold. The label calls him the richest and most noble king of all that land. A West African emperor drawn onto the map of the world by people who had never been there, because his gold had reached them anyway. That was the peak. Mali had everything: the gold, the cities, the scholars, the fame. So how does an empire like that simply disappear? Here's the thing about Mali's power. It was never really in the institutions. It was in the man on the throne. When the throne held a Musa, the empire was the wonder of the world. But when it didn't, it had nothing underneath to hold it up. Musa died around 1337. His son ruled for 4 years. His brother held it together for a while longer. And then it started to come apart. The kings who followed fought each other. Civil wars broke out over the succession. And the moment the center weakened, the edges tore away. The Tuareg in the north, the Wolof in the west, the Mossi, raiding the trade caravans from the south. Timbuktu, the jewel, was raided and burned. The empire that had taken centuries to build began bleeding territory in a single generation. And then came the blow that no king could have stopped. For 1,000 years, Mali's entire fortune had rested on one fact. If you wanted West African gold, you had to cross the Sahara, and you had to go through Mali to do it. But in the 1400s, Portuguese ships began sailing down the Atlantic coast of Africa, and they reached the gold from the sea. They didn't need the desert anymore. They didn't need Mali at all. The gate Mali had guarded for centuries suddenly opened onto nothing. The caravans thinned, the gold flowed to the coast into European ships, and the source of all that wealth, the thing that had made Musa the richest man alive, simply rerouted around his heirs. By 1500, Mali had shrunk back to little more than its homeland. The rising Songhai Empire swallowed its cities, and then, in 1591, A Moroccan army marched across the Sahara carrying something the Sahel had never faced: gunpowder, muskets, and cannon against cavalry and spears. At a place called Tondibi, the last great empire of the region was shattered. The scholars of Timbuktu, the keepers of all those manuscripts, were rounded up and marched to Morocco in chains. And that was the end of it. The age of the great gold empires of West Africa was over. Here's what I keep coming back to. The empire that supplied the gold for Europe's coins, that put a king on the map of the world, vanished so completely that for centuries, the West didn't just forget how rich it had been. It forgot it had existed at all. The word Timbuktu survived in English for only one thing: as a name for the most remote, far-off, unreachable place imaginable. The center of the medieval world's gold trade became a punchline for the middle of nowhere. Almost everything Musa built is gone. The empire, the trade, the gold. The one thing that survived was the manuscripts, and even those nearly didn't. As recently as 2012, when armed extremists seized Timbuktu, ordinary librarians smuggled tens of thousands of those ancient books out of the city, hidden in trunks and rice sacks, to save them. The last fragile thread connecting us to the richest empire on Earth, carried to safety by hand 600 years later. So here's the question I'll leave you with. The richest man who ever lived ruled the richest empire on Earth. And within a few centuries, the wealth was gone, the empire was gone, and in half the world, the memory was gone too. It took a Spanish mapmaker drawing a king with a lump of gold to remind us he was ever real. If something that powerful, that wealthy, that certain of itself can disappear this completely, what makes us so sure the empires we live in now are any different? I'm Cole. This was case number 005. The investigation continues.